Welcome to the Standard Deviations podcast, presented by Orion Advisor Solutions and hosted by Dr. Daniel Crosby, Orion's Chief Behavioral Officer and New York Times best-selling author. Each week, Dr. Crosby interviews a fascinating new guest on a range of compelling topics, from literature to psychology to financial wellness. To learn more about Dr. Crosby's behavioral finance work at Orion, visit www.orion.com.
Hello and welcome to the Standard Deviations podcast. I am your host, Daniel Crosby, and I am joined today by a fellow Charles and a fellow shrink. Yes, that's right. My first name is Charles. I go by my middle name. But I'm joined today by Charles Eckart. He is a fellow shrink who has found himself into the world of wealth. Welcome to the show, sir.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to be here. I'm a longtime listener of Standard Deviations. It's an honor to come on, and hello to the listeners.
Yeah, thank you. So, people will be bored by my journey from clinical psych to the world of wealth management. So why don't we tell them about your what got you into psychology in the first place, and then what brought you to where you are today, which is family wealth consultant?
Sure. Yeah, so my name's Charles Eckart. My name's Dr. Charles Eckart. I'm a clinical psychologist. I had got interested in becoming a psychologist, probably midway through college. I was really interested in working with people, wanted to be helpful to people, really interested in what essential experiences in people's lives contribute to who we become, and, some unknowable mixture of our own sensibility and experiences and conclusions about life and ways that we make meaning of the world and challenges we incur and, kind of whole inner landscape. And I fell in love with it and went to graduate school and postgraduate school, got into clinical practice and started seeing patients and had a few years in academia as well. And I had family history that I won't go into in depth, but had some family history relative to complications and challenges of wealth, and was, I think, from the very beginning interested in not only the field broadly and how humans become who and how they are, but also the additional challenges that external factors play. And when I got into private practice, I saw a portion of my practice was people who either had built wealth or had inherited wealth. And the unique challenges and challenge set that came along with their lives made up a lot of the time that I spent in the clinical room. I saw certainly people that were not had not built significant wealth or come from it. But I was on the inside stoop of helping people prepare for wealth transfer, helping people think about how to parent their children in ways that made the most of their means and resources and limited the blowback or concerns that they had. Worked with a lot of people who maybe had inherited some money but had missed out on a lot of love or affection or connection with their parents, and lived maybe lonely lives and then gotten a big check at the end. People that were, broad spectrum of experiences. And I still keep a small private practice in my life, and then moved over some years ago and founded Cathexis Group with a business partner, also a clinical psychologist and longtime collaborator of mine named Oksana Kushko, in which we then began to bring consultative services to families of significant means, legacy families, and help them sort through all kinds of complexity that comes along with wealth and families, preparation for wealth transfer, parenting children of affluence, sort of cleanup and wealth transfer that happened and maybe happened in ways that were tax beneficial but were psychologically challenging, working with founders and elders and families that had some significant means to do meaningful things. We're trying to figure out how to do so. How do I figure out the balance between protecting future generations and also contributing philanthropically? And so we got into the field and started working with families broadly. And we now do, family consultation. We also have some like institutional business offerings in which we consult with multifamily offices and RIAs in various ways to support them in understanding and working within the family dynamics that come up in families like this. Give some background.
Well, I love that you mentioned family dynamics because that actually really anticipates my next question. I love the quote from Anna Karenina where Tolstoy writes that all happy families are alike, but each unhappy family is unhappy in its own way. And I have been dying to ask an expert like you this question. What are the similarities and the differences between, a middle-class family or an upper middle-class family and an ultra high net worth family? In what ways? I imagine there's ways in which family dynamics are family dynamics, and there's a lot of similarities. But I imagine there's also ways in which money introduces some complexity and some things that might not impact other folks.
Certainly. It's such a hard question to answer for the following reason. I think just like you said, there are similarities in families across the board, and there's also ways in which everybody's a little bit different. The stories we come from, the relationships that are fostered, the sort of combination of sensibilities between members of the family and how that plays out over time. And so it's difficult to answer because everybody's a little bit different. I think that the main ways in which ultra high net worth families differ from mass affluent, middle class, upper middle class families is that there's everything human that anybody would encounter, minus the financial lack in most cases. There's some situations of cutoff and stuff like that, or deprivation. But wealth can be an amplifier for opportunity, and it also can be an amplifier for challenges in developing identity, feeling agency and legitimacy. There can be significant pressure on forward generations of the family mythology. So, colleague of mine, Jamie Weiner, who wrote a book called Quest for Legitimacy, and it centers around this key question for next generation family members of what was it like to grow up in the land of giants? And I think that question kind of captures some of the challenge of the difficulty of developing one's own identity and autonomy in a family in which there is just embedded expectation. Even with the most well-intended older generations that really want to foster independence and difference and encourage people to be who they are and use the wealth to follow their passion and help the world and enjoy life. Even in those families, there's pressure from prior generations around, family identity, family mythology, and what it looks like to measure up. So I think that stuff is much more significant.
It's interesting you say that. I was talking to my wife about this recently, and she was talking about things that drive me and sort of pressure I put on myself, and we were talking about these things, and she said, "Well, when you were a kid, did your parents push you, to get a PhD or to be financially successful or whatever?" And I thought back and I thought, no, they never really did. And I mean, I grew up in a squarely middle class home, but still there was felt like it was almost in the air. Like they didn't even have to say it. And I can only imagine that's amplified in a home where there's this land of giants, which I think is really lyrically put. Yeah, there's this mythos, there's these expectations that are explicit or implicit, and that's a real weight that I don't think is always touched on. I love this idea of the sort of the mythology of the family. Could you say a little bit more about that and sort of what falls to the next generation in terms of perpetuating that mythology and how that might play out?
Sure. This is buried in a lot of the work that we do. I think that there's a lot of strengths that come from family mythology in all families. I'll speak for the sake of the podcast on ultra high net worth families and high net worth families, that there's a family mythology that idealizes the founder of the wealth, hides their challenges. A lot of times people who build significant wealth were eccentric and unusual people. that had unusual capabilities and found timing and ambition and drive and unique strategies to build significant wealth. And there's all kinds of other stuff that comes along with it too. But when families take that person and only tell the stories around how successful they were, it concentrates and increases this feeling of, oh, it sets the next generations up to go, well, how am I ever going to be anything? Right? This person came from nothing and they built whatever fortune on the back of hard work and success. And I want to be a school teacher, or I want to be a general practitioner, or I want to be, whatever it is that I want to be. How can I ever feel legitimate in the face of who they were? And I think instead, when families tell stories about things learned, lessons learned, successes, maybe the uniqueness of the founder, but also that they made mistakes. Maybe the thing that they built the wealth on was their third try. Maybe the first two bombed. And it was as a result of those, quote, failures that they were able to do what they were. Or maybe there's a dark side to how the wealth was built. And the wealth is something that anybody would feel complex about, right? I'm both grateful to have it and want to use it for good and want to use it to fund opportunities. And also there are some things that feel bad about it. Maybe there was exploitation in the story. So telling well-rounded stories of family mythology about the founders and prior generations, I think has a significant opportunity to help next gens learn from and take from the richness of what can be concluded.
I really think there's a lot of wisdom there. I have a relative who passed at an early age. She was in her early to mid 30s when she passed away. And it's been fascinating. She was, by rights, a lovely person. She was kind, she was intelligent, she was well educated, she was lovely. But she wasn't perfect, and she was complicated. And with her passing, there has a sort of deification has resulted, where like the memory of her is infallible, and her siblings struggle, right? I think her siblings struggle because this person who was once, a real human with real dimension and real nuance and good traits and bad traits has now become sainted. And sort of the sainted retelling of her life makes it sometimes feel like other people in her orbit feel like they're not stacking up. And so I could see where something like you're talking about, the importance of telling a well-rounded story, it also occurs to me that the things that lead one to amass great wealth and the things that lead one to be a great parent or be easy to deal with or, easy to live with or easy to be
mutually exclusive.
Yeah, there's not a ton of overlap there. It's something I've struggled with in my own life, where for me, being a good husband and a father is job one for me. Like, I'm imperfect in executing that job, but that I try to keep that front and center. And if you're trying to do that, it absolutely gets in the way of your career. Like you cannot have it all. You can't. You can, there's always sacrifices. I have a great family life. I have a great career, but I could have a better family life if I had less of a career, and I could have a better career if I had less of a family life. I just think that's sort of an honest telling of it. I have never thought about how the things that would make one a successful entrepreneur would so often make one a difficult family member.
Yeah. I mean, like, we could certainly spend the rest of the podcast and more on this idea. I think it's very ripe. And I also think that, I don't know if this is the case in your own family, and I hope this isn't invasive. It very well could be wrong, but it's a common trend when people struggle with grief. Grieving is painful and difficult. And grieving the loss of someone we have complex feelings about is even more difficult. I think it is common to deify someone because it makes it a more pure loss. Right. Then I can just be sad, And I don't have to do anything with the part of me that may feel relieved, or the part that may feel guilty, or what do I do with the fact that I didn't like them, but I loved them, or that I'm still hurt by something that they did, or I feel guilty about something I said. These kinds of things make grief even more challenging. So I think there's always pressure to deify someone. And just as you said, when you walk that up the scale to then become part of the family mythology, it creates some difficulties further down the road.
It's we're gonna get a lot of Crosby. We're gonna get a lot of Crosby family drama on this episode, which thing I was not supposed to, but my dad's mom died when I was 4. So she died, she was having a routine foot surgery and had like a 1 in a million reaction to some iodine in a day surgery and died. So like super unexpected, very young. She had sent my dad a care package of cookies or brownies or something. And they were sitting on the front porch, and like the ants got to him, like the bugs got to him because he was late getting them. So he comes home, his package from his mom is ruined. It's like her final act effectively is ruined. She's died. And guilty is probably the wrong word, but something as simple. They had a great relationship. They were great friends, but like her final act being in some ways negated was a complicated thing for him. And it was brownies. Like, you know what I mean? Like it was brownies and he didn't do anything wrong and she didn't do anything wrong. And still brownies. And it hurt. Yeah. So amplify that times the myriad complexity of a really thorny relationship. And you see how complicated grief can be. And, like you said, getting that big check after a lifetime of, a lifetime of complexity is a big deal. So this is fascinating. I'm having a great time here and spilling on my family dirt. So, every conference we have been to for the last, effectively, it feels like my whole career has talked about the size of the great wealth transfer, right? Like we always hear about that. And at least in my world, it's couched almost exclusively as like a big opportunity for advisors. Like, look, like, are you connecting with the next gen? Are you buddying up to the next gen and taking good care of them because they're about to get paid, right? But all of this sort of simple-minded telling of that story ignores like some very big complexity about the challenges that the people inheriting that money will face. What are we missing? What are the psychological complexities of the great wealth transfer that are lost in the headline, big opportunity for advisors? And how could addressing some of that complexity position them well for that?
Sure. Again, I'll try and be attenuated with what I say. I could say far more than is interesting or useful about this. I think I'll bracket off a big chunk of the great wealth transfer that is a sort of mass affluent, in which I think people have been required to build their own lives and then get money at the end when their parents pass or relatives pass, and I think are set up to have probably an easier time because they built their own careers and hopefully savings and retirement and things, and this sweetens the deal, softens the end. This other thing in which a huge part of that AUM is going to, wealth transfer in ultra high net worth families, enormously complicated. And I appreciate the opportunity to talk about some of the psychological complexity. I think that the idea that, if you imagine a founder who is, preparing to execute some wealth transfer prior to passing away, and then a larger chunk in passing away, and maybe some goes to philanthropy and some goes to family, there is significant preparation that can help the next gens prepare to receive the wealth transfer and make use of it in their lives. Without preparation, I think a lot of people do okay. And they get shaken initially, and there's a serious period of transition, and a lot of people adapt. Significant portion really struggle with it. And for a long time, we've had, sayings like, money doesn't last past the third generation. I think that, again, a complex thing to think about, and there's criticism of this. A lot of times that's because it gets divided among siblings, or it gets moved from a family business into another enterprise or something like this. But it's a challenge to steward wealth over a long period of time. I think maybe I'll briefly answer for the family members, and then I'll say something about the advisors. For the family members themselves, I think next gens benefit significantly in being involved in conversations about money and wealth transfer long before it occurs. In addition, they benefit significantly in developing their lives outside of what's going to happen when I get the money. James Hughes, a mentor of mine and really an elder in the field, wrote a number of books, one called Family Wealth, that I'd suggest to anybody interested in the topic, in which he outlines 5 family capitals. The first is financial, and the least important to Jay. The next is, in no particular order, spiritual, which to me is spiritual meaning, purpose, this kind of thing. Human capital, which to me includes relationships and sort of development of the person and things. Social capital, what one's network looks like, and social network, not for necessarily for opportunities, but social support. But also for opportunities, and intellectual, as somebody had a reasonable opportunity to get educated and prepared for this challenge. I think spending time on those other 4 capitals is of significant benefit for those rising those next gens. For advisors, I think advisors have the huge challenge, and this is what I think gets left out. There's opportunity for advisors to grab AUM, right? So a number of studies have suggested that something like 70% of inheritors fire their parents' advisors within a year, and women do so more than men. So women is higher than that. There may be some flexibility around that number, but I've seen it over and over and over. A lot of times I talk to RIAs that say like, well, we've got better churn numbers than that, and that's all good. But I think that it nonetheless highlights that there's a significant challenge in holding on to next gens that suggests advisors should get involved much earlier in developing relationships with next gens, and not just to keep the AUM, you guys, to go in and develop relationships to help these folks. This is about serving the next generation and providing financial services in a broad way that helps support them in their lives. And I think that not only is lack of relationship a difficulty that probably is influencing people churning out within that first year, but also the idea that the advisors were identified with the parents, right? If I'm an inheritor and I had a difficulty in shaping my identity and autonomy separate from my parents, and had pressure to be a certain kind of kid, and was told that I was so lucky, and, was kind of slapped on the wrist anytime I did something outside of family expectations, and then I inherit a pool of money and had very little relationship with the advisor, of course I'm going to fire them. That's an extension of my parents who I had a complicated relationship. I want a new advisor that will see me for me and help me have a voice in my own wealth. I think advisors that do this the best can see that those next gens, you need a relationship with you, and you also need an opportunity to see them as different people than parents. That can sometimes be a challenge for people. So that'd be my suggestion for advisors.
I love, 2 specific pieces of advice you gave there. One, seeing them as their own people, because again, back to this land of giants conversation, when you are descended from someone who's enormously successful, I think you're used to being so-and-so's kid, and I think being seen on your own terms and appreciated for the person you are is probably enormously refreshing. The other thing that I think about there is just doing it for the right reasons, right? Like, that's why I love the depth you're bringing to this conversation. You and I will write a book about this one day. I don't know why, but people can smell inauthenticity from 1,000 miles away. Like, people can sense when you see a financial opportunity versus when you have genuine compassion and interest and care in them in their lives. And I think, insofar as they've been treated like an opportunity and not like, the unique individuals that they are, like, they can kind of smell that and they move on. So I think that, they should, right? I mean, if you're being treated that transactionally, like, you have options, buy, right?
Sure. You bet.
I'm sort of a believer that, our problems don't go away. They just kind of get pushed up Maslow's hierarchy, if you will. So, for people from wealthy families, like they're not super concerned about having enough for retirement or whatever. It would make sense to me that their problems would tend to become more relational, spiritual, meaning based, this sort of thing. An advisor who's trying to intervene there, I think it's important for the advisors who, are primary audience here. As a clinician yourself, when does an advisor make a referral? Like, what are sort of the red flag? What sort of things, if an advisor's working with a person, getting to know them, some complex family dynamics are coming to the fore. They want to be, they want to help, but maybe they're a little bit in over their head. What's sort of the signal that they may be in over their head and it may be time to call Charles?
Sure. I think advisors have a hard job. I have a lot of respect for advisors, and I think that a lot of advisors get into it because they're technicians and they're interested in markets and they're interested in constructing portfolios, and maybe you're very good at it. They're interested in all kinds of, financial engineering and financial decisions, and, want to do right by themselves and their own families. It's an opportunity to make money. And when families like this come into these financial advisors, oftentimes they want to be understood. They want somebody that they can trust. For these families, returns are kind of commoditized and expected. That's a base rate. They want connection, enduring trust, to feel as though they have an advocate on their side, to feel as though they have a resource. A lot of times, I think financial advisors get into trouble when they feel like they need to have an answer to everything. And when it comes to portfolio construction, there is pressure for them to be able to explain why there's an alternatives allocation that is this big, given the market forces. When it comes to relationships, nobody has good answers. I don't have an answer for anybody. These things are to be thought about, worked through, understood over time. Growth, evolution, and change happen slowly over time. And so when families are coming to advisors with, trouble, family dynamics that are getting in the way, concerns they have about their kids, disconnection that kids may have from their parents, financial advisors do best if they can think of themselves like quarterbacks, and maybe can be trusted advisors initially in providing some compassionate advice and thoughtful ear to hear out what's going on. And beyond that, to then go get resources. You don't have to have this all figured out. The family doesn't have it figured out. How could the financial advisor figure it out in a few hours? And so if that looks like family dynamics that are tied up in the wealth decisions, there are family wealth consultants, and some excellent ones at that advisors would benefit from having relationships with. And if there are larger mental health concerns, which people are really suffering, having a team of psychologists that one might refer out to, I think is important. But I think it's usually when advisors feel in over their head, and when they've maybe tried a few things and it doesn't seem to be getting any traction, or they're worried if what they want to say is going to blow up. And I think it's time to get some support.
No, I like that. The last formal question before I give you a chance to talk a little bit more about what you do. We've both been through clinical training. Curious, which part of clinical training serves you best in your current role as a family wealth advisor, and which skill do you wish you could impart to the financial advisors who listen to this show?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I will be giving a kind of a preview about probably where we're headed in the future in terms of our institutional offerings. We do this with a lot of institutions at this point in time. I think it will grow over time. There's compelling data in psychotherapy research to suggest that the best predictor of therapeutic outcome, the best predictor of the outcome of the therapy across diagnostic pictures, across sort of cultural backgrounds and ages and conflicts and all sorts of things, is the quality of the relationship, the quality of the measure of relationship connection between the therapist and between the patient and clinician. I think this idea around working alliance, creating sustaining and close bonds, trusting bonds, in which the psychologist or therapist is able to hear their mistakes, is able to sustain curiosity even when the patient is upset with them, to understand their failures, to maintain curiosity even when they may be struggling to understand, or in which the patient may be struggling to change, to stay invested, curious, and attuned in a genuine and authentic way is a really significant skill set and highly predictive of good outcomes for psychotherapy. I think this same idea of building strong, genuine, authentic working alliances between advisors and clients, and certainly the way that we work with the families we work with, is based in building collaborative understanding and connection and trust over long periods of time. When we work with families, we usually get brought in because there's a thorn in the paw, or there's some transition they see coming, or they want to be really proactive. But for most families we work with, but not all, we build relationships that last long periods of time, because once we sort of show ourselves as being valuable to the family and they see us as trusted advisors, there's usually a lot of value to that, and they keep us around to some extent. We usually scale back to having quarterly or yearly family meetings. But I say that to say the importance of building close connections and trust over time by showing consistency, investment, humility, willingness to say when we're wrong or when we don't know, willingness to find resources in other practitioners when we're in over our head, builds trust in really big ways that not only helps secure more meaningful relationships for wealth advisors and clients, but also is good for business. Yeah. I think ultimately is good for the industry. We focus a whole lot on technical skills. I think these relationship skills are underutilized.
I want to reiterate this. I talk about it a lot. I went to a school that was very focused on outcomes research, like seeing, who goes to psychotherapy, who gets better, who doesn't. And again, same thing, more predictive than years of education, more predictive than the specific school of thought. There's, the specific approach is rapport. And it's one of these simple but elegant and beautiful findings that just the level of rapport between you and the person sitting across the desk from you is enormously predictive of whether they're going to retain you, whether they're going to listen to and implement your advice, and whether or not they're going to get to where they need to go. Really, really can't emphasize that enough. I think it's a great point. Charles, this has been fascinating. I would love to sit here all day and tell you all about my family skeletons. As we close out, if you would tell us, normally this is the part where I would say, hey, tell us where people can find you and learn more about your business. I would like you to do that. But in addition to that, I think there's probably a need for a little bit of education about where you would be brought in and what your work looks like. So the floor is yours there.
Sure. Yeah, I'm happy to say about what we do and how to find us. I think what's a little more interesting to me is to give people access to resources, particularly advisors, but certainly families as well, where they can learn more about this kind of work and where they can find other practitioners. And we're a small team. We do take people on, and also there's a field of really qualified folks out there. And I think, to me, important to be able to. I want to represent the field well, more than I want to represent myself. I think that one of the places to start is with James Hughes' work. He wrote three essential reads in the area. One is called Family Wealth, and one is called Voices of the Rising Generation, and it is written both to the next gens and also about the next gens. So founding older gens can read it as well and have more of a understanding of some of the challenges of the rising gen. And then he wrote a follow-up book called The Cycle of the Gift that aims at the aging elder wealth holder that's thinking about wealth transfer and thinking about philanthropy and contribution and what to leave behind. And how is it that I can work best to feel like at the end of my days, my life was meaningful. I contributed ways that affected the world and my family, and I can move on in life feeling okay with how I left things. So I'd start with J. Hughes' work. There's a book called Strangers in Paradise, written by Jim Grubman, that's also excellent and describes the very different worldviews between wealth creators and wealth inheritors and how they're kind of set up to not understand one another very well. I mentioned Jamie Weiner's book, Quest for Legitimacy, that is an essential read. And lastly, and I could keep going, but I'll stop. There's a new book called The 10 by 10 Learning Roadmap, Advancing Flourishing in Families of Wealth. That's written by Stephen Goldbart, Stacey Allred, and Joan DeFuria. And they're all, elders in the field, have a ton of experience, and it's a significant contribution. But I think starting with some of the literature and digging into, there are a number of service organizations that provide community and resources to rising gens and to wealth holders, and would be, if that's important for the show notes, I'd be happy to provide those. But reaching out and trying to get familiar with the literature as it is. Another question that you asked is kind of how does this work? How does this even happen? All of us work a little bit differently, but roughly we come in, family wealth consultants come in some period of transition in which a family is wanting to advance their, cohesion, shared family vision, ability to be both separate and connected, and share in the wealth as it is, and allow it to help them flourish as a family and individuals. And skilled family wealth consultants come in and have a variety of processes, including coaching and consulting, and a lot of family retreats are often used to help families have difficult conversations, understand one another better, highlight their shared values, and kind of mechanize them and work together. It's also common that ultra high net worth families use family meetings as platforms that may happen a few times a year that become opportunities to both include financial literacy and updates, and also relationship work like this. So that's commonly used. But I think that, digging into those resources will help people get a lot more information and get a sense of the field.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And again, where can folks find you and your partner in specific?
Sure. So we're on LinkedIn. We have a website that is Cathexis Group, CATHEXIS-group.com. We currently have a stand-in website. We're doing a big institutional build-out of our website, but we've got a simple website that gives our contact and has a little bit of our writing out there. We're available via email and are happy to have kind of off the record conversations with advisors and families. And if we're not available, to refer out to resources that we trust and believe in.
Well, Charles, you're a pro. You're a pro at this, and you certainly deeply thoughtful about these issues. And I think you've planted some seeds today that will help my listeners be equally thoughtful about how they help families going forward. So thank you for the important work you're doing. And we're glad to have you in this part of the world.
Very much appreciated. Daniel, thanks for the chance to come on.
Thanks for tuning in to Standard Deviations. If you can't wait till next week for more behavioral finance insights, visit www.orion.com. All opinions expressed by Dr. Daniel Crosby and podcast guests are solely their own opinions and do not reflect the opinion of or endorsement by Orion and its affiliates, subsidiaries, and employees. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon as a basis for legal, tax, and investment decisions. The opinions are based upon information the participants consider reliable.